Back with another fun Charizard deck. This is actually a request deck that I had requested from Shade the Shedinja, Lizardons, and Bruno Tagliari. They wanted to know how base set Charizard could benefit from the addition of Recycle Energy. So let's see. As I've stated in previous videos, at the end of the base Neo format, fire types really started to come back, and so people jumped at the opportunity to finally utilize that base set Charizard. It was undeniably satisfying to build up to that fire spin and deal 100 damage to your opponent, but the cost of having to discard 2 energy and then spend 2 more turns building up to another fire spin made it a little bit unusable until the fire type finally got some energy acceleration. Typhlosion had a much worse 4 energy attack, but it had a wonderful Pokemon power that could give you an extra fire energy every turn, and it wasn't limited to just one. So if you have multiple Typhlosion on your bench, you can realistically attach at least 2, maybe 3 energy per turn, which more than makes up for the 2 discarded energy off of Charizard's Fire Spin. The card that really stepped this deck up and made it even more usable was Recycle Energy, because when it was attached to Charizard, you could use Charizard's power to turn it into a Fire Energy, then discard it for the fire spin, and it's going to come right back to your hand. This gave you a little more room in your deck for trainers, since typically you would need to load a little more fire energy in, since you're discarding 2 per turn once you have your setup. But with Recycle Energy, you'll always have that energy in hand, and any fire energy that go to the discard can be pulled back out by Typhlosion and hopefully set up multiple Charizard at once. So the gameplay is fairly straightforward, so let's just get into the actual makeup of this deck. In a very rare move, I'm using no Cleffa in this deck, and instead of going with the higher HP Charmander from base set, I'm actually going with the Rocket one that has less HP, but it's got an ability that can come in pretty useful. And remember that in base Neo, basics were a lot safer. You could keep them on your bench since your opponent is going to spend their early turns using Cleffa for Eek. And then I'm also going to run 2 copies of the base set Charmeleon, but also 1 Dark Charmeleon, because I am going to bust out a Dark Charizard in this deck. So the Charizard count is actually going to be 2 from base set and 1 Dark Charizard, because that continuous Fireball attack can be very, very threatening if powered up. So it really is more of a late game Pokemon. You are better off starting with the base set Charizards early game, getting those set up pretty quick. But then Dark Charizard can come in and use that continuous Fireball after it's been powered up a lot by Typhlosion and completely devastate your opponent if they don't have any focus bands. Because Fire Spin has pretty good synergy with Typhlosion, getting those 2 discarded energy back makes for a pretty impressive deck once it gets rolling. The problem is it does take a few turns to do that, because you're having to set up your Typhlosions before you start attacking with Charizard, ideally. That way you know that you can get the 2 energy back within 1 more turn. That way you can use Fire Spin every single turn that you have once you have your setup, because yeah, you're discarding 2, but you're getting back at least 2 every turn. And the idea would be, if you have enough Typhlosion on your bench, if you don't need that extra energy on Charizard, start loading it up on another Charizard on your bench or another Dark Charizard. Using a 3-2-3 line of Typhlosion, Pokemon Breeder is in this deck, so that does help a little bit with the acceleration, getting those stage 2 set up pretty quick. Going with the 50 HP Fireworks Cyndaquil from Neo rather than the lower HP one, using the 2-2 Oak and Elm combo. It's pretty standard stuff, just letting you refresh your hand, getting the cards that you need, which is going to be especially important with this deck since you don't have Cleffa. So you're going to want to get those Elms and Oaks pretty early. Recycle your hands, get the fire energy and the evolution cards that you need. Double Gust and Gust, also going to be running a 2-2 of those because they are situational. Charizard and Typhlosion both have a pretty high retreat cost, so sometimes you're going to want to opt for Double Gust instead. That way you can get one out of the active position. You don't really want to get stuck with a Typhlosion as you're active, because it also requires 4 energy. And that won't be too hard to get on there if you have multiple Typhlosions and you're hitting those coin flips, but it's still not that great of an attack. Because all of the stage 2s in this deck have at least 80 HP, even going up to 120 with base set Charizard, you're not worried about being OHKO'd in most situations. With Rain Dance, it can definitely OHKO you, but with other decks like Sneasel, they're not really going to be able to get up to that 100 damage very easily. So Focus Band isn't nearly as useful in keeping you alive as Goldberry is, because you're going to turn maybe a 2-hit KO into a 3-hit KO in between turns just by having that Goldberry on one of the Charizards. Computer Search is a great way to get those fire energy into your discard easily early in the game. That way, as soon as you get Typhlosion set up, you could start flipping coins for that power. I also have Goop Gas Attack included in this deck. It's a little bit more situational and limited than maybe included something like Igglybuff in this deck. However, it's really just to turn off certain Pokemon powers like Aerodactyls in just 1 or 2 turns. Computer Search is going to be great for getting a Goop Gas if you really need it. It's just most of the cases, the opponent's Pokemon powers weren't really holding the deck back. It was maybe helping them, but it wasn't really keeping this deck from doing anything unless it was an Aerodactyl or sometimes a Muck. In this deck's case, the best defense against a Muck was just gusting it out and using Fire Spin on it. Eco Gem's going to be very important for this deck. Because you're already having to discard 2 energy, you can make that back up with Typhlosions. However, if your opponent is hitting you hard with a lot of energy removals and making it even harder to get those 4 fire energy onto Charizard, then yeah, you have a problem there. So Eco Gem is a great gem to have out. If you're finding yourself matched up with more Haymaker type decks, like Rocket Zapdos or Sneasel, then Broken Ground Gem is really going to help you there. It's going to make all of those baby Pokemon and basic Pokemon harder to retreat, making it easier for you to lay down some damage on them with Fire Spin. A full playset of Recycle Energy, it's going to make sure that you have that energy in hand that you can always transform into a Fire Energy with Charizard's Pokemon power, which can come in very handy if your opponent is hitting you with a lot of energy removals or energy removals that you can't block with Eco Gem, and then you're going to end up with 12 or 13 Fire Energy, which is all of the ones remaining in the deck, in the discard. And if they have something like a Muck and you're not able to get those back out, then the Recycle Energy become your only energy to attack with. If you are running into a lot of trouble with Pokemon like Muck or Aerodactyl, any other number of Pokemon that have some really troublesome abilities, then you might consider adding a couple more copies of Goop Gas Attack or replacing them altogether with 1 to 2 copies of Igglybuff. One of the biggest problems you're going to be running into is Pokemon with Focus Band on them, because then it's not going to matter if you're dealing that whopping 100 damage to them, because they're going to live on 10 health anyway. Where this deck does much better is against those slower Stage 2 decks that utilize Goldberry, much like this one does. Decks that are banking on having at least a couple of turns to get set up, but if you have a Kingdra or a Light Dragonite out, that thing can be one-shotted by a Charizard's Fire Spin. Even huge decks like Metal Chansey can be 2-shotted easily, which it's definitely not used to. This deck is also lacking in any copies of Nightly Garbage Run, as well as an APOM, which a lot of decks were running at the time in conjunction with Nightly Garbage Run. So you were susceptible to decking out much earlier than your opponent, especially if you are using those Oaks and Elms pretty quickly in the game. If you just replace a couple of the energies in this deck with an APOM or a Garbage Run, you'd still be pretty safe. It would make it a little easier to get stuck, but it would also make it harder to deck out. So while this deck was on the competitive scene, it wasn't really that competitive of a deck, because there was just a better Charizard. Blaine's Charizard was a much smoother, more efficient deck, and played much more to the nature of the metagame. Big damage from a Stage 2 didn't really mean very much. It was more about, is it enough damage to knock out a baby? So as long as it was 30, you're good. And if you do want to go the route of heavy damage from a fire type, well, then there's a better Typhlosion deck with Blaine's Arcanine. It was a Stage 1 that could deal even more damage at the cost of discarding 3 energy. However, Blaine's Arcanine could benefit from the Blaine Trainer card and Cinnabar Island Gem. But it did have less HP than Charizard, and it was more reliant on Typhlosion than Charizard would be, and most importantly, it couldn't utilize Recycle Energy in the same way. Dark Charizard is a riskier option because you're relying on coin flips, but if you're finding through your playthroughs that the Dark Charizard is becoming more useful than your normal Charizards, it's very easy to just turn this into a full-blown Dark Zard deck. It definitely has the ability to deal even heavier damage than the base set Charizard and can attack for only 1 energy if you need to. Plus, you could just replace all of the recycle energy in the deck with the Boss's Way. And that would give you a pretty streamlined version of a Neo Dark Charizard deck. I'm curious to see what kinds of thoughts pop up down in the comments for this one, especially those of you in the TCG1 community. I would like to hear your stories about how this fared against other decks you came across. I do thank Shade, Lizardons, and Bruno for requesting this deck and wanting to know more about it. Gave me an opportunity to try to explore this card I hadn't used before in this format, and looking forward to getting into some more request decks soon. But until I do get to those, I will see you guys next video for some more Charizard.